Something crossed a threshold overnight that changes the calculus of this conflict in ways that are still being assessed. Not the exchange of missile fire, which has been running continuously across the region for nearly 2 weeks. Not the deaths of American service members, which happened on July 17th and triggered the retaliatory strikes that have been hitting Iran every night since. What crossed the threshold is the strike that hit a nuclear construction site in southwestern Iran at 3:39 in the morning, and the 3 words that the International Atomic Energy Agency was forced to issue publicly in response: it is investigating. When the United Nations nuclear watchdog issues a statement saying it is investigating reports of an attack on a nuclear facility, regardless of that facility's completion status, and regardless of whether nuclear material was present, something has entered the conflict that was not there before. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi reiterated his call for military restraint in the vicinity of all nuclear-related sites. He said it because the vicinity of a nuclear-related site in southwestern Iran had just been struck. And while the strikes continued, while air defenses screamed over Jordan and Iraq and Kuwait and Bahrain, while the bodies of American service members were being accounted for, a new question was settling into the conflict's architecture. Where exactly are the boundaries of this war, and is anyone still observing them? The Darkhovin nuclear power plant is not an operational reactor. It is not a functioning enrichment facility. It is a construction site in Iran's southwestern Khuzestan province beside the Karun River, where Iran began preliminary work in 2022 and where official construction started only in March 2026, just days after the war itself began. The IAEA confirmed that the facility was in the very early stages of construction and that it contained no nuclear material when the agency last visited it. The strike, according to Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, involved multiple projectiles and occurred at approximately 3:39 in the early morning of July 19th. The AAOI issued a public statement condemning what it described as an aggressive and brutal act, contrary to international law, calling it the behavior of a terrorist and criminal regime with no nature other than bullying and lawlessness. The United States had not responded to the allegation. At the time reporting on the event was published, the IAEA's own statement was carefully worded. The reported attack is not believed to pose any radiological risk, and the Director General was calling for maximum military restraint in the vicinity of all nuclear-related facilities. The IAEA said it had contacted Iranian authorities and would provide further information as it became available. The significance of the Darkhovin strike is not primarily radiological. The IAEA was clear that there is no radiation risk. Its significance is political, legal, and strategic. No nuclear material was present, no reactor was operating. The site is a concrete pour and a construction crane, not a functioning part of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But striking a facility that Iran, the IAEA, and the international community recognizes as a nuclear power plant construction site crosses into a category of action that previous American strikes in this conflict had avoided. The Bushehr nuclear power plant's perimeter was struck earlier in the campaign, forcing the evacuation of pediatric cancer patients and triggering condemnations. Darkhovin is a different kind of facility, an unfinished plant, rather than an operating one. But both incidents collectively establish that the conflict's engagements are now occurring within the geographic space of Iranian nuclear infrastructure in ways that create ongoing tension with the norms governing military action near nuclear facilities. The world was already absorbing the deaths of American service members in Jordan when the Darkhovin news arrived. The attack on Muwaffaq Salti Air Base on July 17th killed 3 American service members and left several others wounded, with CENTCOM confirming 2 killed and 1 missing in its initial statement and subsequent reporting, confirming a total of 3 dead from the incident. The attack struck a cluster of containerized housing units, the modular structures that serve as sleeping quarters for military personnel on forward operating bases, at the Jordan Air installation that has been one of the primary platforms from which American strike aircraft have been operating throughout this conflict. The choice of target was deliberate, and the timing was premeditated. Iran did not discover the Muwaffaq Salti base on July 17th. It has known about it and been targeting it for weeks. What changed was the accuracy of the strike, and the Wall Street Journal and the Associated Press reporting on that change is one of the most important analytical developments of the entire conflict. 2 American officials speaking to the Associated Press on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss sensitive intelligence matters confirmed something that changes the nature of what is happening in the skies over Jordan. Russia has provided Iran with information that could help Tehran strike American warships, aircraft, and other military assets in the region. The officials were specific about what this information included and what it did not. Russia is not directing Iran's targeting decisions. It is not standing in Iranian command centers telling IRGC commanders which buttons to push. But it is providing intelligence of a type that functions as the same category of aid that the United States and European allies have been providing to Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Satellite imagery, Information about the locations of American military forces and allied assets across the Middle East, and technical improvements to the Shahed drone systems that Iran has been deploying against American and allied positions. The Wall Street Journal went further in its reporting, citing an officer and a Middle Eastern diplomat familiar with the intelligence, and specifying where Russian assistance has already produced visible results. Among the targets that Russian-assisted Iranian targeting is believed to have enabled are strikes on American radar systems across the region, specifically including an early warning radar for a terminal high-altitude area defense system in Jordan, and radar systems at other locations in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. A THAAD early warning radar is not a generic military antenna. It is one of the most sophisticated air defense sensor components in the American inventory, and striking it specifically requires targeting intelligence that goes beyond what Iranian forces could develop from their own surveillance assets. The journal characterized Russia's assistance as similar to intelligence the US and European allies have given to Ukraine, which is a precise and deliberately chosen comparison. It establishes that what Russia is doing for Iran is not qualitatively different from what the US does for Ukraine, and that the conflict is now carrying a dimension of great power proxy, intelligence competition that has not been part of the public framing of this war. Alongside the Russian intelligence assistance question, the Wall Street Journal reported that Iran's improving ability to strike sensitive targets has raised concerns among American officials that China may also be providing targeting assistance to Tehran. The concerns about Chinese involvement appear less specifically documented than the Russian case in available reporting, but the convergence of two official concerns, Russian targeting intelligence confirmed by AP sources and Chinese targeting assistance suspected by American officials, places the Iranian missile campaign against American bases in an entirely different strategic context than it has occupied publicly up to this point. The accuracy that got a ballistic missile through air defenses and into the containerized housing units at Muwaffaq Salti, where American service members were sleeping, is not something that can be attributed entirely to Iranian engineering progress in isolation. External intelligence about base layouts, radar coverage patterns, and the specific geometry of how defensive systems are oriented provides the kind of targeting refinement that makes the difference between a missile that is intercepted and one that finds its mark. The technical dimension of this problem involves what the Wall Street Journal specifically reported. Iran has adapted to American and allied air defense systems by firing missiles that travel at extremely high speeds and that can maneuver as they descend toward their targets. This is a description of a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, a ballistic missile warhead that does not follow the predictable parabolic arc that makes conventional ballistic missiles relatively trackable by radar systems. A maneuvering re-entry vehicle changes its trajectory during the terminal descent phase, making the prediction of its impact point much more difficult for the interceptor missiles that need to be fired with lead time to intercept an incoming threat. Combined with the very high speeds involved in ballistic missile terminal phase flight, which can exceed Mach 10 for some modern missile systems, the combination of speed and maneuverability makes the defensive intercept problem exponentially harder than it was when Iran was firing older, less capable ballistic missiles. This is why the New York Times reported that U.S. officials now assess that Iran not only retains substantial missile inventories, but is becoming increasingly effective at penetrating American and allied air defenses. The assessment is not an admission of air defense failure. It is an accurate description of the physical difficulty of intercepting highly maneuverable, extremely fast warheads. Jordan has rapidly emerged as the new focal point of the land war in this conflict. The New York Times reported that U.S. officials stated Iran's forces had attacked troops in Jordan 4 times in 5 days, including the attack that killed the American service members. This frequency of attacks against a single installation over a short period reflects a deliberate Iranian campaign to establish Jordan as a priority target, possibly because Muwaffaq Salti has been one of the most consistently used launch points for American strike aircraft operating against Iranian targets since the resumption of hostilities on July 7th. The United States shifted forces to Jordan from Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE ahead of the conflict, making the base's targeting value from Iran's perspective proportional to the operational importance that concentration of American assets represents. The Times also reported that multiple U.S. manned and unmanned aircraft were damaged in the same strike that killed the American service members, reflecting the scale of physical damage that a successful ballistic missile impact on a hardened airbase can produce beyond the human casualties. The United States Embassy in Amman responded to the continuing threat environment in Jordan by issuing a security alert citing a specific and credible threat in Aqaba, the port city at Jordan's southern tip on the Red Sea coast. Jordanian authorities evacuated both the international airport and the seaport at Aqaba in response, and Americans were urged to avoid both locations and all military bases in Jordan. Aqaba sits directly across a narrow strait of water from the Israeli city of Eilat, and its significance as a transit point for cargo entering Jordan and for the regional movement of goods and personnel makes its evacuation another indicator of how completely the normal functioning of Jordanian civilian infrastructure has been subordinated to the military emergency that Iran's sustained missile and drone campaign has created. The CRAM systems, the counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar systems that have been visible in footage from American positions across northern Iraq provide one of the most visually striking representations of what the ground-level air defense effort looks like from inside an American base under Iranian drone attack. The CRAM fires the 20mm phalanx gun at extremely high rates, producing the distinctive red tracer stream that has appeared in footage from multiple American bases throughout this conflict as it engages incoming drones in their terminal approach phase. The system was originally designed for ship-based defense against anti-ship missiles, but has been adapted for land-based use precisely because of the threat posed by slow, low-flying kamikaze drones of the type that Iran has been deploying against American positions. Footage from northern Iraq showed CRAM systems engaging successive waves of Iranian drones in rapid succession, with multiple interceptions visible in the same frame of footage, reflecting the density and persistence of what Iranian forces have been directing at American positions in that country. The attacks were not limited to Jordan and Iraq. Bahrain issued an alert for incoming Iranian missiles and drones and directed its population to seek cover. Kuwait announced that its air defense network was actively engaging Iranian ballistic missiles and drones. The IRGC separately reported that it conducted large-scale attacks with kamikaze drones against American military assets in Kuwait, specifically targeting an ammunition depot at Camp Udairi and radar systems at Ali al-Salam Air Base, the same base whose radar equipment has previously been linked to Russian targeting assistance. A Kuwaiti desalination plant was struck for what authorities said was the second consecutive day, raising serious concerns about critical civilian water infrastructure being targeted as part of Iran's campaign against Gulf Arab states hosting American forces. 2 oil tankers attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz via a route that Iran had warned shipping companies not to use were reported by the IRGC to have exploded and been forced to cease movement, though the IRGC did not claim direct responsibility for the strikes on the vessels. These tanker attacks represent the continued Iranian enforcement of its contested claims over how the Strait of Hormuz is to be navigated, in direct defiance of American military operations specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of interdiction. In Isfahan, Iranian air defense systems were reported to be firing anti-aircraft batteries in an active defensive posture. Isfahan is the location of one of Iran's most significant nuclear-related facilities, the Isfahan Nuclear Conversion Complex, and the area around it is where analysts and the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists have suggested that a significant portion of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile may have been moved before the June 2025 strikes. Active Iranian air defense around Isfahan, in a period when American strikes are expanding their target set to include nuclear-related sites like Darkhovin, reflects an Iranian assessment that facilities in that region may be on target lists, and a corresponding defensive effort to protect whatever nuclear infrastructure and nuclear material remain at Isfahan locations. Ballistic missiles were launched from Iran's Kermanshah province in the west of the country, adding another geographic vector to the already complex picture of Iranian launch platforms being used across different regions simultaneously. Kermanshah province borders Iraq to the west and has been one of the areas where Kurdish fighters have been conducting operations against IRGC forces in the broader internal insurgency dimension of the conflict. Ballistic missile launches from Kermanshah represent the use of an already contested province as a military staging area, putting the launches in proximity to the border with U.S. allied territory in Iraqi Kurdistan and to the operations of the Kurdish resistance groups that have been hitting IRGC targets in the same mountain terrain. The American response to all of this has been continuous and is reportedly about to become significantly more intense. Reports emerging from the administration stated that Trump directed decision-makers to rain hell on Iran, and multiple outlets confirmed that the next wave of American strikes was being planned to be far more expansive than any of the previous 8 consecutive nights of operations. The Trump administration's public framing has included Trump himself describing the opening of the gates of hell on Iran, language that is both politically designed and operationally significant in signaling that the rules of engagement and the scale of target lists are being expanded in the aftermath of American service members being killed. The combination of IRGC headquarters being targeted, deeply buried ballistic missile facilities being struck, and now a nuclear construction site being hit in the same 24-hour period reflects the expansion of what the American military is willing to strike, rather than a stabilization at the current level. One of the most revealing pieces of reporting to emerge from the conflict on July 19th involves Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Araghchi is the most publicly visible figure in Iran's diplomatic and foreign policy apparatus, serving simultaneously as the foreign minister and the lead negotiator on the Islamabad Memorandum. He gave an interview in which he said that he had not seen the supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei, and that he did not believe anyone other than a limited few had seen him. The foreign minister of Iran has not met the supreme leader of Iran. The chief negotiator of the agreement that was supposed to end this war has not been in the presence of the man who nominally holds authority over all Iranian state decisions. This is not a logistical inconvenience. It is a profound revelation about the state of governance inside Iran. An entity negotiating a ceasefire agreement whose terms the supreme leader has not personally reviewed with the foreign minister is an entity whose chain of command for implementing any future agreement is fundamentally opaque. The implications of Araghchi's admission compound every other question about who is running Iran's military campaign. If the foreign minister who signed and was implementing the MOU has not met the supreme leader, the question of whether Mojtaba Khamenei authorized the ship attacks that broke the ceasefire, whether he approved the strike on Muwaffaq Salti that killed the American service members, and whether any new agreement would be implemented by the IRGC commanders whose actions have been incompatible with the agreements their diplomatic counterparts have signed, becomes genuinely unanswerable from available evidence. The supreme leader, who has not been publicly visible in more than 4 months, has not even been visible to the head of Iran's foreign policy. Whether this reflects a physical incapacity that prevents meetings, a security posture that requires isolation to prevent targeting, or a different dynamic in which certain elements of the Iranian power structure are making decisions with insufficient reference to the supreme leader's actual authority, the opacity is itself a strategic liability for any effort to end this conflict through negotiated agreement. The Russia intelligence assistance dimension of the conflict adds a layer that connects what is happening in Jordan and Kuwait to the broader great power competition that has been reshaping the international order since well before the Iran war began. Russia's provision of satellite imagery and targeting information to Iran, specifically including information that helped Iran target Thayad radar systems, is the mirror image of American intelligence assistance to Ukraine that has helped Ukrainian forces strike Russian military targets throughout the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The symmetry is not coincidental. Russia has consistently framed its relationship with Iran as a counterbalance to American support for Ukraine, and the provision of targeting intelligence is the most operationally direct form that counterbalance takes. The Wall Street Journal's characterization of the Russian assistance as similar to what the US and Europe provide Ukraine is an accurate framing of the dynamic. Great powers are using proxy intelligence assistance to shape the outcomes of military conflicts they are not directly fighting in. This means that the conflict in Jordan and the Strait of Hormuz is not purely a US-Iran bilateral military confrontation. It is a conflict in which Russian intelligence is improving Iranian targeting accuracy against American assets in the same period that American intelligence is improving Ukrainian targeting accuracy against Russian assets. The 8 consecutive nights of American strikes against Iran are happening within a global intelligence competition in which the adversary firing at American service members is being helped to do so more effectively by a nuclear-armed great power with its own reasons to want American military attention consumed in the Middle East. Understanding that dimension of what is happening does not reduce the moral or strategic clarity of the response to Americans being killed, but it changes the scope of what resolving the conflict ultimately requires. The overnight cycle that produced the Darkhovin strike, the CRAM footage from Iraq, the Aqaba evacuation, the THAAD radar targeting, the ballistic missile launches from Kermanshah, the desalination plant strikes in Kuwait, and the foreign minister's admission that he has not seen his own supreme leader is a cycle that has produced more significant developments in a single period than most days of this entire conflict. The question of where the boundaries of this war are is no longer theoretical. A nuclear construction site has been struck, and the IAEA is investigating. Air defense systems are protecting American service members against maneuvering re-entry vehicles, whose accuracy has been refined by Russian satellite intelligence. The foreign minister of Iran does not know where his supreme leader is, and the president of the United States has told his military to rain hell. The gates of hell is an evocative phrase. Whatever follows its opening will be the story that defines the next chapter of a conflict that has already redrawn the strategic map of the Middle East in ways that will not be reversed when the shooting stops.